The sun was slowly setting over the wide, silent desert. The sky had turned golden, then orange, and now soft red light touched the rocks and the dry land. Jack Travers rode his tired horse across the empty plains. His boots were covered with dust and his hat shaded his eyes from the bright last rays of the day. The air smelled like dry earth and smoke. Jack had been on the trail since morning and all he wanted was water and a place to rest. As he rode, the wind carried a strange sound toward him, a light crackle, almost like the last breath of a fire dying out. Jack pulled the reins and stopped his horse. He listened closely. The plains were usually quiet at this hour, only the wind and the soft sound of his horse breathing. But this time something felt different. Slowly, Jack guided his horse toward the sound. Ahead, at the bottom of a small hill, he saw thin smoke rising into the sky. It came from what looked like a camp. Jack's heartbeat grew stronger. In this part of the country, camps were rarely friendly. But something deep inside him told him to go closer. When he reached the edge of the camp, he stopped again. The place looked like it had been full of life only hours before. Now it was quiet. The tents were half fallen. A small fire still burned weakly, its last flames dancing in the wind. Blankets and baskets were scattered on the ground. Jack climbed down from his horse and walked carefully. He had learned long ago never to rush into places he didn't understand. His boots pressed lightly against the sand. His hand rested on the side of his belt, not out of anger but out of habit. He had lived too many years on lonely roads not to be careful. As he walked through the camp, he noticed small things. A child's wooden toy lying near the fire, a few clay pots with dried berries inside, a handmade bracelet on the ground. These were not signs of soldiers or fighters. These were signs of families. Jack's chest tightened. He knew what this meant. People had lived here, people who might have been forced to leave too fast. The sky above him grew darker and the stars began to appear. Jack walked deeper into the camp, trying to understand what had happened. His boots made soft crunching sounds on the ground. The air felt heavy, like a story had been told here that he could not yet hear. Then, just as he was about to turn back, he heard it. A soft, low sound, almost like a whisper. It came from behind a fallen tent. Jack froze. He listened carefully. The sound came again, this time a little clearer. It was the sound of someone breathing. Slowly, Jack moved closer. He pushed aside a torn piece of cloth hanging from a wooden pole. There, lying in the shadows, was a young woman. Her long, dark hair spread across the ground like a river of black silk. She looked weak, but her eyes, deep, dark, and shining like polished stones, were wide open and fixed on him. Jack didn't move for a moment. The woman's clothes told him she was Apache. Her people were known to live on these lands long before men like Jack had come with horses and wagons. Their paths often crossed, and not always kindly. But this woman was no danger to him now. She was alone, tired, and afraid. Their eyes met. She tried to push herself up, but her arms shook too much and she fell back down. Jack took one step closer and she whispered something. Her voice was soft and cracked as if she had been holding her breath for a long time. "Don't shoot, cowboy. Let me live," she said. "I'll give you a family." Jack felt something inside him stir. Her words were not loud or desperate. They were quiet and steady, like a small flame refusing to go out. He didn't know why she said it, but he could hear the weight of those words. For a long moment, Jack stood in silence. The wind pushed gently against his hat. The stars above were bright and endless. In that quiet space, the whole world seemed to wait for his next breath. Jack had spent most of his life alone. He had lost his parents when he was young, worked on farms, traveled with cattle herds, and lived under the wide open sky. He had met people from towns, travelers, strangers, but he had never belonged anywhere. He had never thought of having a family of his own. His life was built on moving, surviving, and keeping his heart closed. But looking at the woman in front of him, he didn't see an enemy. He saw someone who, like him, had been left behind. Someone who didn't want the story to end here, in silence. He knelt slowly so as not to frighten her. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly. His voice sounded strange to him, gentle, even kind. He hadn't spoken to anyone like this in a long time. The woman's eyes blinked and a tear slipped down her cheek. She tried to sit up again. Jack offered his hand, but she hesitated before taking it. When their fingers touched, it was like two worlds brushing against each other for the first time. Jack helped her sit up against a wooden post. She breathed heavily, but she didn't look away from him. Her face was tired yet strong. She had the look of someone who had lived through too much but still held on. "What's your name?" Jack asked quietly. She didn't answer at first. Then she whispered, "Naili." He repeated it softly. Naili. The name felt smooth and warm on his tongue. Naili looked around the camp, at the quiet fire and the empty tents. A deep sadness filled her eyes. Jack didn't need to ask what had happened. He could see it. People she loved had gone, maybe taken away, maybe scattered. She was alone now, just like him. Jack walked to his horse, opened his saddlebag, and took out a small blanket and a metal water flask. He brought them back to Naili and placed the blanket around her shoulders. She held it tightly as if it were a piece of her past she didn't want to lose. Then she drank the water slowly, carefully, like it was the most precious thing in the world. The night grew colder, and the fire was almost gone. Jack gathered some dry wood lying near the camp and built it up again. The flames rose, lighting their faces with soft orange glow. For the first time in a long while, Jack didn't feel alone. He didn't know this woman, but something about sitting there beside her made the silence easier to bear. Naili spoke in a soft voice, telling him little pieces of her story. She talked about her people, about how they lived near the river, how they grew up listening to the wind and the songs of the land. She told him about her younger brother who used to make her laugh and about her grandmother, who taught her to braid her hair. Jack listened carefully. Her words were like music, soft but full of feeling. He didn't interrupt. He just let her talk. It had been a long time since he had listened to anyone like this. In return, Jack told her a little about himself. He told her about the farm where he grew up, about the long rides across endless land, about the nights when the stars were the only company he had. As he spoke, he realized he had never told these things to anyone before. His life had always been a story he carried alone. Naili looked at him with quiet understanding. She didn't need to say much. In that moment, two people from different worlds shared the same fire, the same silence, and the same kind of loneliness. The night deepened, and a soft breeze moved through the camp. Jack leaned back and looked up at the sky. The stars were shining like thousands of small lights, each one a tiny hope hanging above the earth. Naili slowly lay down near the fire, her blanket wrapped tightly around her. Jack stayed awake for a while, watching the shadows move and listening to the wind. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know where they would go or what they would face. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was standing alone against the world. Her words from earlier stayed in his mind, repeating like a quiet echo. "Don't shoot, cowboy. Let me live. I'll give you a family." He didn't know exactly what she meant or how it could ever be true, but those words had stopped him from turning away. They had opened a door inside him that he had closed long ago. As the fire burned low and the night grew still, Jack realized something had changed. His life, which had always followed a straight and lonely road, had suddenly taken a turn. And this turn had a name, Naili. The first light of morning spread across the dry land like a soft blanket. Golden rays touched the rocks and sand, making the desert glow in warm colors. Jack woke up before the sun fully rose. The fire had almost turned to ash and the air was cool. He sat quietly, listening to the wind moving through the hills. It was calm now, very different from the night before. A few feet away, Naili was still wrapped in the blanket he had given her. Her breathing was soft and steady, and for the first time since he had found her, her face looked peaceful. Jack watched her for a moment. He wasn't sure why, but he felt a kind of quiet comfort just knowing she was there. When she finally opened her eyes, the sun was already shining. She sat up slowly, holding the blanket around her shoulders. Jack handed her the water flask again, and she smiled gently before taking it. It was a small smile, but it felt warm, like sunlight after a long winter. Jack spoke first. "We should move soon," he said softly. "The sun gets strong out here. We'll need shade and food." Naili nodded. She didn't speak much that morning, but her eyes said enough. She trusted him now, not fully, but enough to follow his lead. That meant something. They packed what little they had. Jack tied his saddlebag and helped Naili climb onto his horse. She moved slowly, still weak but determined. He led the horse through the desert path toward the canyons, where he knew there was a small cabin he had used many years ago. It wasn't much, just wood, dust, and a roof, but it was safe. The ride was long and the sun grew brighter. Jack walked beside the horse, making sure Nayeli was comfortable. Sometimes she closed her eyes to rest and he made sure the path stayed easy. The sound of hooves and wind was the only music they had on that journey. When they finally reached the cabin, it stood quietly between two tall canyon walls. The wooden door creaked when Jack opened it, and the inside smelled like old earth and dry wood. It wasn't fancy, but it had everything they needed. A bed made of hay and cloth, a table, a few tools, and most importantly, shade from the hot sun. Nayeli sat down on the bed, tired but calm. Jack poured some water into a small bowl and gave her a piece of bread from his saddlebag. She ate slowly, as if each bite carried her a little closer to strength. The next few days passed quietly. Jack worked outside during the day, collecting water from a small stream nearby, fixing the roof and making the place more comfortable. Nayeli spent most of her time resting, though every day she grew a little stronger. Sometimes she would help by sweeping the floor with an old broom or bringing in small pieces of wood for the fire. In the evenings, when the sun began to set and the air cooled down, they would sit outside the cabin near the small fire. They didn't always talk. Sometimes silence was enough, but when they did speak, their words came slowly like two rivers finding their way to meet. Nayeli told Jack about the songs her grandmother used to sing to the moon. She shared memories of running through green fields as a child, of braiding flowers into her hair, and of how the night sky always made her feel safe. Jack told her about the first time he rode a horse as a boy, about how he had always loved the wide open land, and about the old house where he used to sit on the porch and watch the stars. These were not the kinds of stories he usually shared with anyone. But with Nayeli, the words came easier. They learned small things about each other. Jack learned that Nayeli liked the sound of rain on a roof. Nayeli learned that Jack always whistled softly when he worked with his hands. These little details slowly built a bridge between two hearts that once belonged to different worlds. One evening, Nayeli braided a few strands of dried grass together and tied them into a small loop. She handed it to Jack. "For you," she said softly. Jack looked at it, unsure what to say. It was simple, but it meant something. He placed it in his pocket like it was the most valuable thing he owned. The seasons began to change slowly. The hot days grew softer, and cool winds passed through the canyons. Nayeli was no longer weak. She walked with quiet strength, her hair shining under the sun, her voice calm and warm. She started planting small herbs near the cabin and taught Jack how to use them to make tea. Jack, too, felt different. His life had always been a long road with no real end. But now each day began and ended in the same place, and a place that felt like home. When he worked, he no longer worked only to survive. He worked to build something for both of them. One night, as they sat by the fire, Nayeli looked at him and said, "You saved me that night. But I think you also saved yourself." Jack looked at the flames and then at her. He didn't speak for a long time, but inside he knew she was right. When he had lowered his hand in that camp, he had not just chosen mercy, he had chosen a new path. As the days turned to weeks, their bond grew stronger. Nayeli would hum soft songs in her language as she cooked or worked with the herbs. Jack would fix the fence, collect water, and sometimes just stand quietly watching her, feeling something he had never felt before: belonging. Word began to travel slowly through nearby towns and camps about a quiet cowboy and an Apache woman living together deep in the canyon. Some people didn't understand it. Some didn't approve, but Jack didn't care and Nayeli didn't either. They had built their own world, one made not of fear but of quiet trust. There were challenges, of course. Sometimes food was hard to find and the nights grew cold. Sometimes the memories of their pasts would return like shadows, but they faced those moments together. Jack would sit beside her, holding her hand when her heart grew heavy, and she would whisper soft words to calm him when old worries tried to return. The cabin changed with time. What was once empty now carried the sounds of laughter, of quiet talking, of footsteps. The walls smelled of herbs and smoke. The floor was covered with woven mats Nayeli made, and the small table in the center always had something on it: a piece of fruit, a flower, a cup of tea. Years passed like this, not with grand adventures, but with soft, steady moments. Their story was not written in battles or big victories. It was written in the way Jack brushed the dust off his boots at the door, in the way Nayeli smiled when she saw him return each day, in the way the firelight danced on their faces at night. Eventually, others came to the canyon. A few travelers, some friends. The cabin became a place where people found warmth, food, and kindness. Jack and Nayeli shared what little they had, and in return they received stories and friendship. One evening, many years later, Jack sat outside the cabin as the sun set. Nayeli sat beside him, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes still full of light. They watched the sky turn gold and red, just as it had on the day they met. Jack thought back to that night, the broken camp, the soft whisper, the moment everything changed. If he had walked away, his life would have remained a long, empty road. But he hadn't. He had stayed. Nayeli gently placed her hand over his. "You gave me a home," she said softly. He looked at her and smiled. "No," he replied. "You gave me a family." The wind moved softly through the canyon. The stars slowly began to appear one by one, and under that endless sky, two lives, once strangers, had become one story. Their names were never written in history books. There were no big monuments or songs sung about them, but those who passed through the canyon told the quiet story of a cowboy who chose kindness and a woman who answered with love. That story lived on, whispered like a warm breeze on a cold night, a reminder that family is not always born from blood or tradition. Sometimes it is born from a single moment of mercy, a quiet promise, and the simple choice to stay.